Zoom presentation in here last year, but John Cobes and I had to separate because they were echoing. So welcome this morning. We have a resident geographer here, Jerry Weingarten. And Jerry is, what can I say? He's been involved in academics with multiple colleges. He's traveled extensively. He will show us a lot of pictures, but today he's going to be talking about the Great Lakes Basin, which of course is our home for all of us here. And I want to welcome Jerry and say thank you for doing this. He tells me that he's been doing this with HASP since 1996. So he's one of the originals. And he probably has done this before, but there's always a demand for more and for new people coming in. So with everything put aside, I'll open this up by saying, Jerry, it's your show. There are maps and questionnaires back there. Jerry, being a good teacher, has brought us a quiz to answer as we go along, and you can fill it out. And I'm sure he'll show you the answers later if you don't get them. But please pick up back there. Also, don't forget to do your evaluations. That's very important for the committee to see how you enjoyed this, what more you want, and it gives the committees documentation of what we can do in the future. So without any further babbling from me, Jerry, it's up to you.
Mm.
And I will have questions. I'll have the microphone come around so everybody.
What happens when I take my mask off?
Oh, go ahead and do that. Sorry.
Okay, now let's see if that works. All right. Is it coming through? Are you hearing me? Okay.
So we're hearing you at home as well.
Okay. I'll talk a little bit more. Is it still coming all right? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Just a
And thank
reminder
you,
for
Richard.
the people at
Okay,
home.
appreciate
you-
that very much. It is something to be able to see faces, well, part of the faces again. It's wonderful. Talking into the computer in the past several lectures, why kept wondering who's out there and are they listening? Are they off to get their own coffee or what are they doing? And at any rate, I'm glad to be here. Today, let's say you have, of course, the little quiz is not really a quiz. It's something that you follow along. That's all. And if you're close enough to each other, that's one thing. Then you can at least consult with one another because you remember, some of you anyway, the definition of cheating. My definition of cheating? Well, in this class, if you do not talk to your neighbor about the answer, then you are cheating your neighbor out of your superior knowledge. Oh, okay. And that seems to work here. Thank you, Richard, for the introduction. Thank you. Well, let's see. This is a little different because I have two screens to point to, and I'll try to at least one or the other so that maybe you can see them. But we'll get started here with the Great Lakes.
Oh, God.
Some of you have traveled probably the Great Lakes and are pretty knowledgeable about many things. And I appreciate when people talk about those
But I
things
just
and
had to
add
make it
that
so
to
I
the
could keep
class.
using this.
Absolutely.
So just a quick perspective here. I hope you have a map that you can follow and as well as a little bit of a quiz. As you can see, this is just a quick view of the Great Lakes area, including the St. Lawrence River, and it is our plan to go upriver rather than downriver. So let's go start at the mouth of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Okay, here. And you can refer back to your map every so often. This is a pretty good map as far as the little individual things are concerned. Is your map big enough that you copied? Sometimes it doesn't come out big enough, but this doesn't look too bad. Okay. Just a quick little bit of information. There's a useful side to this whole Great Lakes system, and that is it does transport quite a few goods. One of the main ones, it's kind of interesting that it's the iron that is picked up in the from Duluth and from the Upper Peninsula and so forth, and winds up through the factories either in Erie or in Pittsburgh or elsewhere. So that's a biggie. The other one is very important to coal, except maybe coal is being diminished now because of the need for that kind of energy as being replaced with especially here in Holland, where it's been replaced with natural gas. All right, let's see where we are as far as a whole number of ports that adjoin to the lake system. And you can see almost every place that you want to see in the area of, well, it starts out in the Duluth area, way up here, and winds up with many different ports. It's another important commercial entity for the whole thing. But look at all the various ports that you can see on here without my talking about each one of them. Great Lakes. I take note of the Lake Superior is approximately 600 feet above sea level most of the time, but it fluctuates back and forth. And if you were on a ship of some sort, a barge, a lake freighter, you have to go from 600 down to 0 somehow. And of course, obviously, that's going to be all the different locks that you can run through. And we'll be looking at some of those. But that gives you a quick picture. Now, notice that Lake Superior is the deepest and is probably the largest in the well, it's almost the largest lake as far as volume is concerned. It has more water than the other very, very large lake, which is this one. This is Lake Baikal over in Russia, but it's very, very deep. As you can see, it's much, much deeper than Lake Superior. That's because it's on the edge of a fault line where two slabs of the Earth's crust is meeting each other and splitting enough to make it very deep. Lake Baikal.
Mile deep.
Lake Michigan datum lake level is 577 feet above sea level. 18 inches below average in January of 2013, and it's varied since then. The lake below average for the last 15 years, it's below. And we have some results of that, of course, with the erosion and the like. What happens to the fluctuation of the lake? Well, it loses water somewhat through the albedo. As you can see, the reflection off of the surface doesn't leave the heating. And then as a consequence, the lake gets warmer and warmer. And less ice, less solar reflection, and the water warms earlier in this season. So as a consequence, you do get this fluctuation of losing lake water into the air. But we also have a diminishing area of water from the lake through a couple of places. One happens to be Chicago. The other one's Wilmette and Calumet. They pull about 561 billion gallons from the lake every year. So that is a problem. The people around the lake, the Great Lakes, do not want to lose water. They do not want to have it deferred out to the Midwest, where they need a lot of water. So some would very much like to replenish some of the water, like at the Ogallala underground system over in Nebraska and the like, but we'd like to keep the water here as much as possible. And in so doing so, the people that get together, the states in the country of Canada gets together to make sure that it doesn't get all diverted. But just to give you an idea, 1 inch of water on Lake Michigan equals about 800 billion. Well, there are two main man-made diversions that go into Lake Superior. That helps. If Chicago takes some out, at least it is brought back somewhat. This brings 25% more than Chicago takes out. Here are the diversions. As you can see, way up in the corner, the Ogoki diversion is one of them. Actually, they diverted this, instead of it going to Hudson Bay, they were able to divert much of that water this way to Lake Superior, the same way as Long Lake or Lac Lake. Those two diversions do help a lot. But notice the diversions down in Chicago take some. We lose some there, and we lose some in the Welland Canal, and we lose some of that also in New York Barge Canal. You even wonder whether that Erie Canal was still around, but it still has some function. I understand people have sailed down that thing. Anybody here made that little trip down? Okay. Once again, just a quick notice where these places are and how we lose and gain water into the lake system. Chicago was a real big problem for a long time. And as you can see, the intake areas along the Lake Michigan shoreline. And there are a couple here that are very significant. And if you can see, especially in the area of the Chicago River, for a long time, the Chicago River was discharging its waste into Lake Michigan. And that, of course, was not good. And they stopped that and made it go down the Chicago River on down to the Mississippi instead. Well, that problem still remains in a couple of these other ones. So let's see whether I can show you that a little clearer. In this case, you can see that the intakes are out over into the lake, okay. But you have to have some kind of a sanitary sewer system that brings all the water back into Lake Michigan. And if you can take a look at that line, the black line anyway, that one is the divider between what has to go into Lake Michigan and what goes the other way to the Mississippi. So that fight keeps on going on along. Let's take a look at that a little bit more. That nice big blue line here is where they had to shut it off and make sure that any of the wastewater goes the other way and not into the lake, not into Lake Michigan. So this, I think, is kind of an interesting little answer to the puzzle. As you can see where the line is, where the divide between Lake Michigan and of course that would be the Mississippi River, where the water goes one way or the other. Waukesha is a city in Waukesha County, and it had real trouble getting water from its wells anymore. And so they just asked, petitioned Milwaukee if they could use some of its water. But Milwaukee gets its water out of Lake Michigan. Okay, but Waukesha is across the line. Well, okay, if you're going to do that, you've got to make sure that whatever water that we send to you, you've got to put back into Lake Michigan. And this shows you the line to Waukesha, the green line, to bring the water to Waukesha, and it crosses the line. So then they had to do something about it. Well, they'd have to build another line back to Lake Michigan for the return flow, trying to keep the lake levels normal. It is rather important. These are all agreed upon between the two countries, actually more of the states and the provinces of Canada. Once again, the whole drainage area of this whole system. Let's take a look at the beginning of our trip up the St. Lawrence River. At Quebec City, it is only 3/10 of a mile wide. It is constricted by the heights of Quebec and Cape Diamond. Now, for 95 miles downstream to the river is about 16 miles wide. Now, 95 miles from Lake Ontario. This is what we're talking about downstream. So there's quite an area there that is wide. And as you can see, it is much wider at the Gaspé Peninsula. So it's 87 miles wide there. So that's okay for any of the ocean-going vessels. So from Quebec to Montreal, it is at least 1 to 0.3 miles wide. Once again, take a look where Quebec is. And the various show of the cliffs that have been a barrier for people who want to get up there and claim the area. For instance, here we have the Plains of Abraham, that green area in there, if you can see that. Plains of area, and they have to go up this nice cliff if they want to attack the city of Quebec, which they tried to do way back. If you recall the war between the British and the French on this particular thing. But that's a picture of it is now before you get into up the cliff. Way back in 1759 then, we've got Quebec in one spot and the Plains of Abraham right next to it. So they want to get into the Plains of Abraham, that is, the British did, in order to conquer the city, which they did. And you give it a little idea of the flow of this as it goes through the area of Quebec and where the plains are. And Wolfe, of course, was the commander at that particular point of the British Army, and they tried to climb that cliff, and they really were, well, they made it up to the top, but at a great cost, as maybe many of you remember. But this is what they look like from a distance. The cliffs of Quebec. It's a nice big area out in the front of it. And then we see that we start this seaway from the, before you get past Quebec, or we're going to get into Montreal here in just a few minutes. And as you can see, yeah, Montreal is the area where you really need to have some, the start of some climbing up the river. So why have the locks then? Well, from Lake Ontario to the Gulf of the river, the river falls 245 feet. You're going to have something there in order to raise ships and lower them. Okay. The first 50 miles drops only about 1 foot. That's not too bad. The location of the 1,000 islands. The next 50 miles drops 90 feet. And the Iroquois Lock and the Eisenhower Lock are in that area. We'll be looking at the 1,000 islands here in just a little bit. If you look at this particular slide, the arrow points to the level of Lake Ontario, and it goes all the way down to the Montreal level. And that is the area where you find just all these locks. The bottom line, the bottom of the slide here shows you the number of locks that are involved in going through there. Again, you can see that that short distance, there are 7 locks before you get to the Welland Canal. But you got to get yourself through those locks somewhere along the line before you can get into the level of Lake Ontario. So this kind of pictures a little bit of where the 1,000 islands are in that rectangle. Happens to include Ontario too, but the area of the 1,000 islands is rather interesting. Now I'm wondering, before they could really move into any lock system whatsoever, they decided to build a canal in the Lachine section of Montreal. They had that to escape the rapids of the river. It was opened in 1825 and closed in 1950. Well, when they closed it, they didn't need it anymore because they built a dam below and to hold back the water so they could get some good lock system going. And that's out near Montreal. And they built some locks to get you through. So if you got your sailboat out there and you want to go through here, you'll have to take some locks. And I understand there are a number of people who have done that. They've talked to me about actually making their trip through the Great Lakes and then winding up in the Atlantic and all the way to Florida with their sailboat. So there's 7 then St. Lawrence River locks in this area. And you notice that what's written on the bottom there are the names of each one of those lakes, or the locks, some by Canada and some by the United States. Now back to the 1,000 Islands. 1,000 Islands is a rather interesting place to go. I understand people have taken their boats, pleasure boats, and stopped at these places. Here is one picture of those islands. The 1,000 Island Bridge is in that same area. And if you take a note as to where that might be on that little map that's in there, it makes the bridge back to the United States or up to Canada at that particular point. But nearby happens to be a couple of interesting little islands that have special castles on them. One of them happens to be the Boldt Castle. Boldt Castle is near the Alexandria Bay on the island called the Heart Island. So let's see once what that looks like. At this point, the castle is built on this Heart Island. There's a little pump house way on the end. But otherwise, the island is pretty well complete. The Boldt Castle is on Heart Island. Let's look into that a little bit further. It's a beautiful little island, and the castle is also very interesting. Let's see once what happened with Boldt anyway. George Boldt was the manager of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York and Bellevue Stratford in Philadelphia. Well, in 1900, he started construction of one of the largest private homes in America, which is the one on the island. Construction stopped abruptly in 1904 on the death of his wife. And then it just stayed that way for a while. Structure was left exposed to harsh winter weather for 73 years. Well, eventually, the Thousand Island Bridge Authority acquired the Heart Island in 1977. So in the next 20 years, the authority spent $15 million for restoration and improvements. By the way, I'll ask the question, anybody been to Heart Island? Yeah, we have someone. So over there, okay. If you've got any comments, I'd be, tell me whether I'm correct or wrong. That's all right. The Boldt Castle. So what it looks at that angle. It's known for its oak stairways, and it's a beautiful, I understand, very nice. Have a grand staircase in there. So that is a place that you can take a tour if you wish. And then a picture of the pump house out in the back. Now there's another one too. This castle is on Dark Island. And Dark Island was built by Frederick Bourne. He happened to be the 5th president of Singer. Singer what? Sewing machine, okay. The sewing machine magnet, all right. So he built that one, and I guess that's also very interesting to see. Another picture of how that looks from the outside, from the air a little bit. Now we move up the lake, the river a little bit, and this is sort of an interesting feature, I think, of Canada along the St. Lawrence River. They divided the area along the coast or shore, or whatever you want to put it, the bank of the St. Lawrence River into long lots. It was a practice in France. France had a particular island that they wanted to have exposure to the water for people who had their products to be sent down the river or out into the surrounding water. And so they kept this particular process when they organized the land along the St. Lawrence River. So these are long lots. They have frontage of maybe 350 to 600 feet, and then it extends way back so that they could have at least frontage to the river to export their products if they wanted. All right, now let's go to another little feature of this area. 19 Seaway Locks in this particular area from Montreal to Lake Ontario. There are 2 US locks and 5 Canadian locks. The Welland Canal has 8 Canadian locks. St. Mary's River at the Sioux has 4 US locks. Now, here again, I have run into people who have gone on this particular waterway, the Trent Severn Waterway. It ignores going through Lake Ontario and goes inland through the province of Ontario. And as you can see, maybe from there, the next picture shows it a little bit better, but starts at Trenton over there and winds up here at Severn. Now, another picture of how that looks. 240 miles long from Trenton to Point Severn, 44 locks, 20 miles of man-made canals or channels. Has anybody here taken that trip? We have one. Okay.
Yeah,
Before I've
I
had
have.
at least 2 others that remarked to me that they made that trip. So if you've got some comments to make, please do so. Okay. Let's get it started here a little bit. 240 miles. That's quite a ways.
You want comments now or later?
The first little while is by Trenton.
Yeah, here.
Okay, over here. And right away, you run into at least 6 locks. So you're climbing immediately. And the last person I talked to that did that trip had a little sailboat. Of course, they didn't use any sails, but they could get into this trip with their motor on the sailboat. So you start with these locks. One of the locks, however, is rather unique, I think, and we'll find out whether our resident here thinks so too. It's at Peterborough. I have a picture here of Peterborough. This is the way it works. It has 2 levels. Level that you enter into either level when it's down or up. And as a consequence, once you're on there, it has to change somewhat. What happens is that one boat chamber is lifted while the other boat is let down. It is lifted 65 feet. So there's a high hydraulic pressure to help that happen. But now take a look at this. You can be on the upper lift, and I can't tell whether they are coming or going on this one. But the top one either is discharging what it had from the bottom or is being loaded up, probably both. And the bottom one is empty at the moment on this picture. Shows here that a couple are leaving on the bottom, but that's quite an outfit. So the top boat slip is filled with more water, increasing its weight. This helps lower the boat and the counterbalances, raises the other boat. The size of the chambers are 30 feet wide and 139 feet long. So once again, you see where the people are either leaving or coming. And here it is at halfway point. And I can't tell you which one is going up or which is going down. Okay. You have any comment on that? Go ahead. I think so. He says so. Evidently it works. There is a charge. Yeah.
Hey, Jerry,
This
can
is a
you
rather
hear me?
interesting trip all the way through there.
Jerry, can you hear
There's
me
a
over the
bunch of
loudspeaker?
kayakers on one of the levels. So we're going up or down.
I have great experiences of that, but I don't think he can
Well,
hear.
part of this
Yeah, I
whole
don't either.
Seaway has some
We'll
important
figure it
cities
out. Go
Here's
ahead and
one
put
that I
your
picked.
questions in chat,
to show a little bit of
and
anyway.
at an appropriate time, we'll
Toronto,
go in
the
there
most
and see if we can't
Populous
turn up the
Canadian
sound.
city.
Okay,
Yeah. There's the projection here blocks out a little bit of that, but I think we can read most of it. Well, let's take a look at this particular city, and maybe some of you recognize that the landmarks like the CN Tower and so forth. It's a beautiful city. And we looked at a couple more things here. And the what, oh, I see. Thank you.
And it's real.
Yeah. Rogers Center is a rather, okay, that ought to work. Okay, thank you. Eaton Center is a big shopping center in Toronto, and of course the CN Tower is famous for its landmark. Not only that, but you find that now I'm having trouble. My clicker isn't working, so. Oh, the Rogers Center is the home field of the Jays. Okay. Oh, now my clicker is working. Whatever I did or I didn't do. Okay. And as you notice, it's got the cover of the field when weather is not good. It's a rather interesting thing to watch. Happened to be there when it did close one time. Oh, now we're getting down to real business. Okay. Quiz 1. Now, is this a woman's world or what? Okay. You want to give yourself a half a minute to make out the quiz? And then I'll give them to you in a minute, okay? Quiz 1. There's the answers, but maybe you can't see them. Okay, I'll read them off quickly a moment. 1 is dog, D is in dog. 2 is love. 3 is king. 4 is fox. 5 is jig. 6 is able. 7 is how. 8 is Baker. 9 is George. 10 is Charlie. 11 is easy. Now, the quizzes are not all that brilliantly made, but some are stretches as far as that's concerned. But it kind of keeps you on the track while I'm talking, I think. That brings us to the next quiz. And we started off with some interest in glaciation, because it certainly has made a big dent into the area where we live. Now, if you can see let's see, the red line is the last advance of the glaciers from the north. And it is the Wisconsin Glacier. It has overridden a number of the other advances, the evidences of advances. For instance, the one that Kansas one overrode the Nebraskan and so forth, which happened to some of the others too, but some are still there, the evidences of their meringues and their features are still very present. But notice there is one area that is like a circle over in this area in Wisconsin. It's known as the driftless area. All the advances missed it. And you can see that in the structures of the landforms that are left. The nice tall columns and so forth haven't been mowed down by the glacier. It's known as the driftless area. So if you ever travel through that, it's kind of interesting to see that particular aspect of it. Just a little bit of that history to develop the next thought in this one. Take notice of the events in 14,000 years ago. Notice that they're calling it Lake Chicago and Lake Maumee. As you move to 9,000, well, they're changing it to Lake Algonquin and Lake Erie, early Lake Erie, and early Lake Ontario. Now, we got some problems on the bottom again. So, as you can see there, let's see. The lake changes its name again to Lake Chippewa, Lake Michigan does. So we'll move to that next part here in a minute. Still got the line down below. And I think Susan is looking at that one. Oh, we're going to get the top technician here to see once what he can do with that one. But notice the little features while he's doing that on this one, the little arrows. The little arrows show that they are features from that glacier.
It won't go any lower. Oh, sorry.
They
Would you rather have it
they
on top or
just wiped off. Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
No. Okay, well, all right. These little arrows represent drumlins. And we can talk about it without all the information below, although that would be rather interesting too. The drumlins are formed under the glacier as they come down, and you can see that feature very clearly when you travel through the country. If you know what you're looking, people just think, well, they're hills. That's it. They're just hills. But it's more than that. No, I can't make it. I can't make it move
No,
either.
you can't.
Huh, all right.
Sorry. It's just not
Okay.
here.
It's going to be there. It looks like the inverted spoon. Okay. It develops under a glacier as some of the dirt gets stuck on a resistant rock, allowing the dirt to pile up in a rounded shape. Many are found in the central New York state as well as Wisconsin area. And as that other little map showed you where some of those were. This is what they, a drawing of what should look like anyway, of a drumlin. There's a blunt end and it tapers off. You can see a couple of them here, and if they're in a group, they might look like the nesting of the drumlins. Actual picture of one. Now, again. And this is some area in the area of New York, some drumlins in that area. Once again, another picture of it. Just looks like a hill, at least for most people who look at it. Finger Lakes, part of that same glacier action, which made the drumlins. So they're made by the glacier that dug out Lake Ontario. Lobes followed small rivers made by the melting glacier. Then the glacier advanced again, digging out the rivers much deeper. And there are 11 narrow lakes with the highest, usually on the northern end, of the south end of the lake. They're the Finger Lakes. And as you can see there, the Drumlins and the Finger Lakes of New York. If you are traveling on Highway 90 through there, you're going to be running through many of them. And sometimes you don't really notice it. They're just hills. But if you look carefully at them, they do have a slope to it. They do have a way of having an edge on the end. So go there now. They're loaded with beautiful colored trees. The Finger Lakes in the New York area. Okay. Nice place to visit and vacation as far as that's concerned, and many people do. Okay. Now we got one more here, and I think Susan's maybe helped me here a little bit too, to get rid of that bottom line. But while she's doing that, this is the Niagara Escarpment. And notice where it is going. It starts, well, it doesn't necessarily start one end or the other, but it appears, of course, by Niagara Falls. But if you take a look at that, here we go. At Niagara Falls here, and it moves all the way, the escarpment moves up the area all the way through this, up to the Sioux and on back down through the Door Peninsula. That's the Niagara Escarpment. And that Niagara Escarpment is, of course, where the Niagara Falls occur, but it stretches a long ways. She's got this thing working here, so I'm going to, although the next one, which doesn't move, that's the next one. It's a show of the Niagara Escarpment. If you happen, thank you, Susan. If you happen to be traveling in Ontario toward Niagara Falls, then that big line up there represents the Niagara Escarpment in actuality. And of course, there it is again, except it's being accorded a very nice view of some falls and the like. So, okay, that's part of it, Niagara Falls. We're back into Canada now on the lock system. We've got to go from Ontario to Lake Erie. And in this particular case, if you, or unless you want to go the other direction, but they're numbered from Ontario to Lake Erie. And you will find 7 locks early on and one near the shore of Lake Erie, the Welland Canal, of course. And many of you, I think, have probably been there as well as Niagara Falls. So this is just more information about that. Notice that near Lake Ontario, you have the most locks. And they really have to move quite a bit of distance up or down, whichever way you happen to be going. Once again, I show you this map because with the arrow that is set there, it's looking at Buffalo. And I want to say something about Buffalo for a moment. Buffalo is on the windward side of Lake Ontario. And as a consequence, it is being fed constantly for moisture from the lake of Ontario, the long draft of that lake. And when it gets close to the land, it rises. And of course, if it's in any kind of cold weather, you're going to have snow. And you've heard probably of Buffalo having snow and snow and snow. So it's a nice city, but it gets covered with snow, deep snow. They're used to it, a lot of it, okay? Buffalo. Now, as a general topic here, there are 35,000 islands in the Great Lakes. Almost all had lighthouses. And Johnston Island is one of those. And I picked that island out because it has a significance to history. But notice where Johnston Island is with that little arrow that's pointing, the red arrow pointing down to it. But there are just a host of many islands around all of the Great Lakes. One of the famous little stories of our incidents on the Lake Erie was this business of the walk in the water steamboat. It was called Walk in the Water by the Indians at that particular time because it had no sails and they could not figure out how it could go. So they just simply said, well, it is the walk in the water. So, yeah, here, okay. All right. And
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
and I got,
Work now.
there we go.
Sorry.
Admiral Perry, in 1813, put in Bay Lake, Ontario shore. And that's a picture of him doing so. Okay,
You should.
we're going to get it.
We're gonna get it.
There's the put in the bay. So way back then, now it is as of today, but way in the back when Perry did that.
That should go away.
Okay, hey, it's going away. All right. Now I can see the whole thing. Thank you very much. Except it won't move. I wish I could have tapped that too.
Okay, try it.
Okay. We're back to Johnston Island. And Richard here was talking about that earlier before. It says Confederate soldiers up on the top of that. It's obviously a cemetery. Johnston Island is just off of the coast. It's at Sandusky. It's 3.5 miles off the coast of Sandusky. All right. It was the housing of 3,000 Confederate POWs at one time, 1861. And those that died there, of course, there was a cemetery for them. But many, of course, lived long enough to leave. Some tried to escape, but life was fairly good for them there. At least they didn't have to fight in the Civil War. So that's Johnston Island. Now, we've got to get out of Lake Erie and try to get ourselves up to Lake Huron. Okay, how are we going to do that? Well, you got to go near Detroit, but just look at that map for just a moment. And notice how you have to go up to the Detroit River and then Lake St. Clair and on up to the St. Clair River up to Lake Huron. First of all, you pass Detroit. And that big laker is evidently moving through that same passageway. It has a number of places it has to go through. In this particular one, the arrows are going down, but just reverse it if you're going up, obviously. And you have some familiar places there that it goes past. And one of them, of course, is the River Rouge area, the Belle Island area. Eventually you get through to Lake St. Clair. Okay. And once you get up to that point, the Lake St. Clair River gets you up into Lake Huron, and most of you, I think, will recognize the Port Huron Sarnia area as we get as you go off from the United States into Canada. And that is the Blue Water Bridge, of course. All right. Now let's go on up into Lake Superior. First of all, take a look at the areas that it starts with. It starts with Duluth in this particular line. But notice there's another line, the dotted red line. It's the division between Canada and the United States. And the story is that they were determining where that line should be. They representatives from Canada and the United States got onto a boat and decided to make the trip to divide the land. And the people from the United States decided, well, let's just get the Canadian people rather happy here on board, and fed them, got them to drink enough. So then they made sure they went around Isle Royal, and so it would become a part of the United States rather than Canada. Rather a sneaky way to go, but this is one very big lake. But around that lake are various natural resources, iron particularly in this particular show. Notice that the Mesabi Range is nearby, and of course they can put their coal on at Duluth, or iron on at Duluth. And then in the Michigan's Upper Peninsula, the Gogebic Range is also noted there. And as you can see, Iron River, Crystal Falls and Marquette Ranges are famous in our area here. Okay, well, what do they do? This particular one shows the operation at Duluth, but that's repeated again in Marquette and various other places, but particularly Duluth and Marquette. The Lakers come in and they are loaded at this dock. This happens to be at Duluth, although a similar one is there at Marquette as well. They load them up with iron ore. The iron ore looks like this at this point. They have reduced the ore into pellets. They have taken out some of the moisture on it and ground them up a bit and reformed them into pellets. And the pellets then are high content as far as carbon is concerned, and they're ready to go to the steel mills without having a lot of impurities with it. And the steel mills, of course, love that. They can just pour it right into their furnaces that way. This one happens to be at Marquette. Now I show you a couple of these others just for a moment here. The A.M. Anderson was in contact with the Edmunds Fitzgerald when it sank. So we show this to give you an idea what the size of these Lakers are. And this one, it looks like it's probably rock. It might be, they don't really transport that much in sand, although it looks like it's a sandy color. This a picture of the Edmunds Fitzgerald. I think my wife took this one because I have it in my possession. That's obviously before it went down. This is the trail of the Edmunds Fitzgerald. Take a look at where it starts at Duluth, and it just goes on up through almost to the other shore, but before it starts to come back south. And when it starts to come back south is when they start to really hit the wind and the Edmunds Fitzgerald. It's 729 feet long. So that may have something to do with the possibility of its, sinking. Because at this particular drawing anyway, it's top of 50-foot waves at the crests. And it probably, they are thinking that it hits that crest like that, and it was too much for it and broke and went down. But it was going through a very, very strong wind and storm, as you can see here. That's one picture of what it might be looking like, or like that. And finally, you get to the Sioux locks. Couple locks there to get you into the level of Michigan and Huron. They are at the same level. Okay. Before I leave Lake Superior, we'll take a little deviation here, if you will. Lieutenant Harry Colburn. British. A veterinarian, served in the British Army in Canada. He traveled along Lake Superior to a place called White River. He bought a bear cub for $20 from a hunter that had shot its mother. Here is White River. If, the little arrow should show it to you over here. White River on the shores, not too far from Lake Superior. Again, showing where White River happens to be. Well, the lieutenant in 1914, she's showing here with his bear cub, with Winnie the bear cub. Where am I going? You know where I'm going. Okay. Lieutenant Colburn named his cub Winnie after his home at Winnipeg, Manitoba. Transferred to England, he took Winnie along to the London Zoo. Make sense? Christopher Robin and his father, A. Milne, visited the London Zoo. They loved a bear named Winnie and a swan named Pooh. So here is Robin, Christopher Robin, with Winnie the Pooh, or with Winnie. Okay. Of course, he's the author of the Winnie the Pooh. Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh is shown here in this particular picture. A. Milne wrote the book. They tell a story that the bear held up his arms because there were many flies. He would blow off the flies that landed on his nose, hence the name Pooh. But the bear was named after a swan named Pooh rather than the other story. But you can believe whatever story it is, doesn't make much difference anyway. But as a consequence, you get this guy. All right. Winnie the Pooh, 1966. Okay, became a rather important thing to our kids. Well, let's go. Let's move away from Winnie the Pooh and get back to business here. All right. This one shows, once again, this time it's Lake Chicago. All right. And you see this sequence of the receding of the glacier. And so you get all these lakes showing up again as they are today. Well, let's look at one that's a little bit older. In this particular case, at the time, it was then Lake Chicago. Lake Chicago was at the end of the Lake Michigan lobe, obviously. And then I'd like you to notice the connection between Lakes Saginaw and the Lake Willacy. These were all lakes formed as the glacier was receding. There's a little patch right here in Lake Michigan, which involves us very closely. I don't know, can you see it on both sides? Right here. It is from about Holland up to Muskegon, that area, and then on over toward where Grand Valley University is, where the dunes are of the Grand Valley, off of Grand Valley University. That area between there is very flat. It is flat mostly because during this particular age, this particular time, it was covered by Lake Michigan, and the wind with its powerful forces stir up the water enough to make the surface underneath the water pretty flat. Same kind of action that you find when the water descends upon Lake Bonneville in Utah, where they have the big races and so forth. And as a consequence, makes the area very flat and ready to go for their races. Well, here we just have a very flat area which grows lots of fruits, vegetables, evergreen trees, as you know. Olive Center is right in that part, and so is Borculo, and kind of in the middle of it. But if you go right through there, it shows how nice and flat it happens to be. That's because of this particular age. So just keep on moving with that. And notice in this particular one, we have a couple blue spots. The blue happen to be the deeper areas. This is known as Lake Chippewa. Lake Chippewa, when it was some years ago, many years ago, and notice that on the other side where the X's are, where the formation of the lake was at that time over present day Lake Michigan size. All right, what about Lake Chippewa? Well, this is what it looks like at that time. It was the black, of course, shows you the area where the water was still the present. It had receded from the other part of it. And then some people want to know, when I ask the questions quite often, have you ever seen the Grand Haven River? Well, you're wrong, because it's not Grand Haven, they tell me. It's Grand Rapids River. Well, that's true. In Grand Haven, it is the Grand Rapids River. But out here in the middle of the lake is the Grand Haven River. It's, of course, under the water. So you probably have never seen it, unless you're that age. You'd have to be. I know, we're getting older, but to this, not that old, okay? Now, we go back again. During one particular time of formation of the North America, there were a number of basins. And these basins are areas where water then would flow in from the outside. It came in from the ocean, so it was of various content, lots of salt in it and the like, flowing into the Michigan Basin in this particular case. Well, as it flows in, it settles on the bottom in layers. This particular one happens to show you the two different kinds of rock, but on the other hand, and it will show you also where the escarpment was of the Niagara, and gets a good picture of the various layers that this basin is made of, that we live on here in Michigan. And the colored ones tell you what particular time, what era it was. The red happens to be the upper Devonian. And the green happens to be the upper Mississippian, middle Mississippi. So it gives you a little feel. Now, how does that affect us? Well, quite a few deposits here. As you can see on the end, the halite, or or salt and anhydrites and various oil and carbon coal features in that area, all being deposited here into their nice little Michigan basin. Okay. As an example, happens to be the salt mine beneath Detroit. Just one picture of many that I kind of selected. But it certainly was a very rich deposit of Detroit and used for many, many years. I don't think they use that anymore. The Detroit might crumble into some of these, they reinforce the roofs of the various trails. But that's not the only place where we find mines like that. You go into Kent County, the gypsum mines below the Grand River. And many of you, I'm sure, remember I guess it's not smoke, but it's tossed into the air anyway. It looked like some kind of discard from the processing of the gypsum in the Grand River area. It's all finished now, but the mines still remain there. It's not too far from where Granville meets the city line of Grand Rapids along the Grand River, that particular area. And in those mines today, the gypsum mines, they have done a little bit of covering the floor so that they could use their little transporting vessels to store things down there. And for many, many years, and still today, they have stored things in the gypsum mines in Grand Rapids. Now, what's rather interesting is that then Kent County decided that would be a safe place. They go down maybe about 50 feet, not that terribly far, but it's all sealed off and it's a safe place. So they store all their records there. So if you happen to be born in Grand Rapids or Kent County, your name is probably restored in one of these files down there. At one time, I took a group of Hess people to this whole storage area, and we walked down through some of the tunnels. Rather interesting. And since that particular time, I've had a request, why don't you take some more people down there? Except they won't let us go down there anymore. The liability is too great. The person that owns it is a Hope graduate, and he was very willing to help out, but there's just too much liability involved. So we haven't been back there for many, many years. All right. But our system is loaded with particularly nice resources, that's for sure. A quick picture of the Grand Valley or the Grand River Basin as it goes through at Grand Haven. But notice that it also starts out in Jackson down here and moves on up through Lansing and eventually gets up to Grand Rapids and on into the lake. Now that is separate from the Black River Basin, as you can see in this particular one, but you get a little feel as to where it is draining into Lake Macatawa. We're still in Michigan. We're getting close to the end of that. Some rather remarkable, beautiful places. And of course, one of them happens to be Sleeping Bear Dunes. And at the Sleeping Bear Dunes, evidently the dunes were piled up very high during one of those periods when the lake was rather low and wind could pick up the sand and pile it up. And as you can see here, there's all kinds of dune areas. The dunes, by the way, move constantly. And one of the areas happens to be right next to Sleeping Bear Dunes, which moved over a forest. And the forest then was covered with sand. But lake erosion, as you can see, is a real problem. This happens to be one of the pictures at Grand Haven. But there is something called the ghost forest, and many of you maybe have seen that one too. But the ghost forest was a real forest at one time, covered with sand, and then later sand was blown away from it, and you find the little sticks now that are remainders of those trees, called the ghost forest. It's all up there by Glen Arbor and so forth. Okay. At least I have one picture of a lake fair that came to Holland. The Mommy is here. And I think it had coal. I'm not sure at the time that I took this picture, which was a few years ago. And everybody recognizes that one. Must be getting close to the end. Quiz 2. These dogs, the reason a dog has so many friends is that he wags his tail instead of his tongue. Would you agree with that? Okay. All right. You got it all figured out and you've all passed the course already, right? Can't see the answers? Well, then we'll get the answers. How's that? That better? Ah. Am I supposed to give you the answers? Is that the idea? All right. Let's see, which sheet do I have here? Okay. Well, a quickie then, all right? Number 1 is Charlie. Number 2 is King. Number 3 is Fox. Number 4 is How. 5 is Love. 6 is Baker. 7 is Easy. 8 is George. 9 is Abel. 10 is Jig. And 11 is Dog. And everybody got them all right, correct? Yes. Well, after I gave you the answers, you got them all right, right? Okay. Well.
Jerry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a question from the
Oh.
chat.
Okay.
And the question is the formation of the Irish Hills near Jackson. She was referring to Drumlins and whether that formation makes up the Irish Hills area of Michigan near Jackson, which is very and suddenly hilly, surrounded by a more regular Michigan landscape.
I think that is an esker. An esker that is formed underneath a glacier. It looks more like a snake as it's traveling across the landscape. It's formed underneath a glacier which is tending to melt and is forming a deposit of material as it melts in a stream-like fashion. So it looks like a stream that has been filled with rock and sand and whatever until you get to be really a hill when it finally winds up being I think that's what the answer to that one is. But it's also an area where we have moraines all over. The moraines, for instance, here in Grand Rapids is between two rather large moraines. And that's why you have the valley there. The one moraine is known as the Valparaiso moraine. It comes in from Valparaiso near Indiana. So those formations are all over also. Any other questions, Susan? I guess.
That's all I had in the chat, Jerry. So if Richard wants to check the classroom for any, that's all I have.
Okay.
I actually have one comment. Let's see. At the very beginning, when we were experiencing some audio difficulties, Jim Hagel commented that this was the most enjoyable and memorable houseboat vacations that they ever took. And I think that was just near the beginning of the presentation. And then the lift lock at Peterborough was amazing, amazing to experience. It is very old and an amazing engineering feat given the time it was constructed.
Thank you very much for that comment. Okay.
Yeah, that
wonderful.
reflects the Trent Severn Waterway trip we took.
Yes, that was part of that trip. Must have been anyway.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Bringing the microphone.
Any comments that you want to make?
Yeah, Jerry, when the Nestle company took water out of the.
Yeah. Mhm.
They put water back in. or what
Yeah,
happened?
yeah. As far as I know, they did, yes.
Jerry,
Well,
can you repeat
they-
the question?
When Nestle took water out of the Great Lakes,
Thank
did they put water back
Thank you.
in?
They, they made some kind of an arrangement, but much of that water then was left in bottles. Wasn't it? So they did come to some kind of an arrangement to only take so much, not much, but so much out. So,
I'll be over there in just a second.
okay. No, thank you for that question. It's interesting.
Hello?
Go ahead. That's that. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Then
I'll repeat the question then.
I guess I have to repeat it here. Okay.
Just a comment, because we talked about the French strip farm on Lake Ontario. They go all the way up Lake Huron. And you still see when you get into Lake Clear on the north end. I facility who has a piece of
Okay.
property that is 50 feet wide and 300
Feet long. Okay. The comment was that the long lots are present, even what was Lake Huron, as well as just along the St. Lawrence River. Okay, but that's an actual thing that's still going on. Okay.
Any other?
Now as you travel through the countryside, it's amazing where some of the history comes into why they did what they did. And this, of course, was the long lots answered a problem for the French.
One of the slides you had, it showed where the old reef had been. It looks like it extended right into Wisconsin. Can you find the Petoskey stones in Wisconsin?
Good question. I wouldn't be a bit surprised that you can, because that coral is not only here, but I don't know whether I found too many in the Upper Peninsula, but they're around. That's for sure. Anybody have an answer to that question? Other than mine, stab at it. That I can't answer for sure, but I think that's correct. Boldt Castle was I don't think anybody ever lived in it unless they have a caretaker in there that's all the time living in it. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that would be the case. But you can go and visit it. Yeah, that's a very good idea. Yeah. Okay.
Just a comment, I was recently in Wisconsin. Discovered the Ice Age Trail. It's about 1,000 miles long, and it's only in Wisconsin. It goes from Green Bay down to southern Wisconsin, and goes back north. And it coincides with your picture of how far the glacier.
I see. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Fox River Valley in Illinois
Fox River,
is also glacial.
Glacier Valley. Yeah, the flock. Okay, the Fox River Valley as well. I'm trying to repeat at least a little bit of that. Now, there is a trail which I have outlined before for Hess. It starts in New York and goes all the way to the Saskatchewan Lake in Montana. And it does go through Michigan. And some of you may have even walked that trail, but that you have walked that trail. It's a very interesting kind of thing, but and I can't remember exactly all the places where it went through, but it does zigzag quite a bit through the various states. It's called the North Trail, I believe. North Country Trail. Thank you. North Country Trail. Okay, good.
Jerry, we thank you so very, very, very much.
Okay.
It's to me much more interesting to hear about the Great Lakes than to hear about the Urals in Russia. I think I will visit here much more frequently than I would over there.
Well.
So, but we also enjoyed that too. But thank you very much,
All right.
Jerry.
Right.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well,
If there are forms in the back to fill out, please do so we know what's going on. And have a good day.
and thanks for coming. That's great. Enjoyed it. I think I've been stopped. Okay. Hi. Hi.
Sue Couch. I just wanted to come up and formally introduce myself. I work with you to be the SIN coordinator. I'm the Science, Medical, and Technology Committee Chairperson.
Your couch.
I'm Couch. I'm
Oh,
Sue
well,
Couch.
all right.
Yeah, I'm in
Yeah,
here.
you're in there. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, well, sure. I've met you before.
I,
He said he was in SMT for a while.